you know, part of the sharing of staff between our space world, Calabash, and WTF. It's really inspired by a lot of the work, like the majority of my career, as many of you know, has been as an attorney, and my actual, you know, thought in doing estate planning as an attorney as my specialty was I grew up in Florida. I grew up where there are a lot of advancing aged peoples. And so my entire career has been impacted by considerations around transition planning, farm transition planning, business transition planning, even like transitioning from like traditional to organic. But especially as I'm like getting older, a big thought that has been coming up for me around transitioning planning is something that I was telling folks earlier. I was in a conversation this morning with some land stewards who are like, you know, what are we going to do about the baby boom land transition that's emerging? And so, just this conversation around transitioning from the colonial world to the decolonial world that we're all part of building together. It's really important that we listen to across the generations. And so my team, Raylan actually was leading a team meeting and invited everyone to share about their favorite books. And it was the most animated my team has ever been during a meeting. And one of my team members is pretty notoriously reserved, I would probably say, in terms of, you know, being on camera. But leading behind the scenes, I would say this is probably also like Raylan. Like most of my team are people who are like go-getters behind the scenes. But they're also amazingly wonderful, deep thinking, critical thinking powerhouses that give me a lot of hope for the next generation. And so part of my excitement is that I will not be hosting today's book club, and I'll be introducing the host in just one second. But I wanted to invite Donna. Are you able to share the poem with us for our grounding?
Tanya, you scared me. It's like because I just clicked on and then you said share, and it's like so I had to find Mrs. Zippert's book of poems, and so I thankfully had saved a few. It's kind of short. Is that okay?
Please, please. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you remembered because I forgot to
That's
send you
like
a reminder email.
that was the first thing that I heard when I logged on. That was Tanya saying,
Yeah, no, and I think
"Okay,
it's so wonderful because Carol Zippert, as many of you know, is one of the founding voices and leaders behind the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund, a huge icon in the civil rights movement, and coming from a family of just legendary civil rights leaders from the state of Louisiana. And so, in the conversation around transition planning, Ms. Carroll has also been a person that has been talking a lot around the Federation about like those elders who are, you know, advancing in age, really memorializing and commemorating the work that they have done. And so, I just, when you said that you were going to share a poem of hers last time, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. And so, without any further ado, Donna Folger of Rural Coalition will be giving us our grounding poem for this evening.
okay." It's short though. Okay. Excuse me. It's called Treasures We Gather. We gather treasures all our lives, even when we don't know it. A moment determines the treasure. Some moments never leave us, some treasures last forever. We gather treasures all our lives. What a blessing when we know it. Wasn't that neat?
That was
Sorry,
beautiful.
I'm having a bad allergy day, so that's why I had the pause.
No,
But wasn't
no. That was
yeah,
beautiful.
wasn't that nice?
It really was. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And especially since you're having an allergy day, I'm especially grateful for you sharing that grounding with us. And so like I said, I'm really excited that as a part of my transition planning, I've been really intentional about, inviting my team to like take on more and more things. And um, I I want to say that Lena volunteered. I want to say that Lena volunteered with her passion about reading and teaching and just her very deep personal connection to this piece of work. And when I asked Lena to share with me a bio, she reminded me that she's early career. But what I took away from our conversation is that Lena loves people. She's here to learn and she's figuring things out. And there's so much more that could be said of Lena. But I also want to give a lot of space for her leadership and to allow her to introduce herself as well. So without any other pauses, here is Lena.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm definitely everyone just rock with me, please. I'm really looking forward to like getting to this discussion. And I guess I'm gonna introduce myself. So just like was said, I'm Lina Felix. I am a associate um tech technical assistant consultant at Our Space World, and I mostly work on Daniel's team. As background, doing what needs to be done. And I would like to say that I'm a scholar, but maybe not. I think I'm a scholar internally, exploring what the world has to offer, and just seeking connection, between people, cultures, communities. I think that's pretty much at the core of me, trying to um, just integrate all the different parts of the human experience. But without further ado, I don't know. We're at the last session for the Wretched of the Earth, which is crazy. It's such an incredible book. It's honestly even more than a book. I just feel like it's such a like view insight into what the world is like truly, because colonialism has reshaped the world entirely. It's reshaped the world in a specific image, and we're still grappling with the effects of that today. We're definitely not in the clear. um and this book, it does have a lot of significance for me. I think growing up, I had my two parents. My father's from St. Lucia, my mother's from Grenada, and they definitely instilled in me early like a pride in my identity, just as a Black person, not even just nationally, like a national identity, which we're gonna talk about today. But yeah, I really do feel super strongly about this book. I think Frantz Fanon, he really just opened up my eyes to so many um all the details and the intricacies of this world. Like I feel like I was very much grappling with my experiences and trying to figure out and define what's happening, all of these different layers. It's a very multi-layered experience dealing with the remnants and of colonialism and neocolonialism and just imperialism and all these oppressive systems. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it with everybody. So without further ado, let's get into the discussion portion of the day. So, this section of the book is titled The Trials and Tribulations of National Consciousness. And I'll just start off with this quote, which is the first quote of this chapter. So, he's really, you know, painting the picture of what we're going to be talking about. It says that history teaches us that the anti colonialist structure is not automatically written from a nationalist perspective. Over a long period of time, the colonized have devoted their energy to eliminating iniquities such as forced labor, corporal punishment, unequal wages, and the restriction of political rights. This fight for democracy against man's oppression gradually emerges from a universalist, neoliberal confusion to arrive, sometimes laboriously, at a demand for nationhood. But the unpreparedness of the elite, the lack of practical ties between them and the masses, their apathy, and yes, their cowardice at the crucial moment of the struggle, are the cause of tragic trials and tribulations. So, boom. Does anyone have any thoughts coming into this quote as just this initial, this opener of a chapter of the chapter? Okay. So I chose to highlight certain parts of this quote. Primarily, history teaches us that the anti-colonialist struggle is not automatically written from a nationalist perspective. So he's going in depth in this chapter on what it is to be to define like your struggle, like to be he comes to the conclusion truly that like nationalism is not the answer. Like you're not going to be able to really come to a conclusion of what it means to be free, going from it from the nationalist perspective. Yes, so then I also highlighted that the fight for democracy against man's oppression gradually emerges from a universalist neoliberal confusion because a lot of this chapter, a lot of what he's talking about is a recognition of just what it does to a people to be defining yourself in opposition to the dominant culture, and the dominant culture in this case being like the European culture. We are told like all these different things about what it means to be a person, literally like to be a human, but not only to be a human, but to be a nation, to be whatever class you are within a structure. And one of the primary items of discussion in talking about nationalism in this chapter is I really want to highlight this word universalist because we are not coming from it from a universal. We're not like a universal, like people, like humans. We're not all like this one perspective, one solution cannot be applied to every single person, you know. So when we're thinking about defining consciousness for ourselves and we're thinking about what it means to be free and to define our different roles in a free system, we have to fight against this entanglement we have with being like defining ourselves in relation to being like European and or like following these European ideals. And I think I see a hand. I think.
Yeah, I raised my hand, excuse me, because this is one that I think about a lot in terms of what's happening in the United States right now. I think that a lot of people that are observing what the way we're interpreting it is the dismantling of democracy, right? We're talking about this current administration leading a fascist regime that is erasing American democracy. And I think that what this this section was really in the 60s warning a lot of the folks that were getting their liberation at this time is that you can't skip the step of decolonization and get to nationalism, because then your nationalism is pretty much just a copy and print of what the colonial project was on your particular lands. And especially what you said, Lena, about universalism, like it's so interesting to me right now that what a lot of folks are calling for to meet this current moment of, fascism, like the King's March, like we're bringing together people that might not have come out to like a Black Lives Matter march because they didn't necessarily see that as a part of preserving American democracy, right? Um, and so I think that there are so many ways that people living in the United States right now are getting an opportunity to decide, like, are we going to continue to try to live in England's shadow of its failed colonial project? Or are we going to actually decolonize all of our systems in ways that meet all of the struggles, as opposed to, being pit against groups is what the US democracy is about right now, right? Like, so losing that and getting something better is a great thing, but I think losing that, and just like keeping it going with, like, for example, in these countries where you have women fascists being the first elected president, it's like, yeah, that's not, or like sending women capitalists into space. It's like, that is not feminism. Um, it's just a replication of empire. um so yeah, when you said universalist, like that was one of the things, is that like America has this opportunity to really bring a lot of fights together.
Yes, and definitely a heavy repeat on the replication of empire, because that is a huge part of what Fanon is talking about. In just this latter section of the book, we definitely see what on different levels. I really enjoy, first of all, his foresight is incredible, like remarkable, but also just the very layered perspective he has of all the different ways that this like system affects society, affects like a colonized people, and not only a colonized like people, but also the people doing the colonizing. It's just so comprehensive. It's so comprehensive. So something else that comes up when I think of the like factitiousness and like just all of the conflict that comes in trying to define your freedom from a nationalist perspective is when you just look at, we get to lose sight of things. We lose sight of everything in this fight of like resources and I'm better than this, and I'm trying to pursue the undeniable superiority of your culture. It gets We just get lost in the sauce. We're repeating the same structures and the same like pursuit of, honestly, like what is the pursuit of, you know? But if there's no more thoughts, we can move on to the next quote. Oh, Adamba, please.
Hey, I realize you probably can't see the chat. I was just saying the lack of preparedness of the elite, and then I just put in capital letters, the Democratic Party. Um, so, so many thoughts around this, right? Like the first chapter, well, the first part of the book kind of talking about, how the organizing favored those already in the um, urban centers, those who already, and so that group, is used to being in the know, I'll just say, or, being those that are, protest or do advocacy. So I like how, but this quote is talking about, and there's no reach to the masses, right? And and I and those Tea Party, those fascist, because there are all these different elements within the Republican Party, right? So I'll just say the far right of the Republican Party understood this, and I feel like they did put together, an offensive and a defensive to go after, the rural masses. And even now in real time, with how all of these monopolies are happening, with billionaires to control media across all platforms, so that the rural masses will continue to only receive their branding, their messaging, right, which will further um, extend the time that we could even possibly get to having a nationhood, a full nationhood conversation. Yeah, all of that. I'm sorry, I know it's a lot, but just when I think about this, like where we are now with this quote right here, it's like how we need the elite to get it together, if you want to call them elite, and figure out how to make inroads to the masses because NPR has been shut down, PBS. I'm saying like the Republicans, those the fascists within the Republican Party were on their tactical, and now we are suffering the effects of that. That's it. Thanks.
Can I add something?
Of
I,
course.
I can't find out where to raise my hand. It like my app has deleted it. But the things that came up for me specifically around history and colonialism in this context were two things. One, timelines. And the fact that he was writing this sort of pre a lot of African technical liberation, but post this Algerian revolution that he had been present for. It was so powerful to me to locate this notion of these comments are relevant today, but they were also predictive in the moment, very specific to his access to psychiatry and the impacts of colonization. So his ability to predict the breakdown in different uh, societal dynamics, tribal, ethnic factions had everything to do with the fact that there are so many unique colonial models and contexts unfolding even on multiple continents. Um, I think this is a really powerful chapter for people that are coming out of an American context of colonization, where, white people moved in and then moved in a labor force, as opposed to some other locations, namely on the continent in South America, some where they they did not move in droves. They just had figureheads representing colonial dynamics and how that impacted how people even conceptualized what liberation looked like. And so in a lot of African contexts, you have the Africanization of these colonies where they change the flag, they Africanize things, but the functions that he's discussing haven't shifted. The explicit use of education for the purpose of propping up a colony, you know it didn't work out that exact way here. They were just cutting off limbs trying to get us not to read, but in other places it was like, we need people to be able to read very explicitly so that we can manage these extractive mechanisms. And so just the absence of inevitability of things happening in a particular way, because there were so many different models, and how predictive the outcome could be based on understanding layers of consciousness. And so that was the other thing I was going to say that I thought was really important that emerged here, were the layers of consciousness and identity, and the role that that plays in freedom, in liberation, but in the operation of a free society. And so I think we see that here as Black people coming from whatever context, our selective levels of national identity, when we tap in, what we're even listening to. And you see this play out in the continent in different contexts. My first experience with it was in college as a student in Ghana, because almost everything on the radio about politics would be in a native tongue language, except for all of the words like democracy. So it would be native tongue, democracy, native tongue, Congress in session. And so the political structure sitting on top of identities that didn't fit was very pronounced. And I think some of this chapter really speaks directly to what that looks like in a decolonial process.
Wow. Every single addition from everybody was so on the nose. I feel like y'all went into my brain and pulled everything out. We done jumped all the way ahead in the slides. Like, oh, this is perfect. I love, like, this is the space that we're in right now. And I don't even know I don't even know what to say, truly. So I shifted the quotes a little bit because I feel like this next quote speaks specifically to what Adama was saying. But I think we'll have a lot to say on this next one. But yeah, no, that was amazing. Thank you, everybody. Wow. Okay. So does anyone want to read the next quote?
I can read it.
Thank you.
Okay. The administration swells out of all proportion, not because it is expanding or specializing, but because more cousins and more militants expect a position and hope to slip into the works. And the dream of every citizen is to reach the capital, to have his piece of the pie. The towns and villages are deserted, the unaided, uneducated, and untrained rural masses turn their backs on an unrewarding soil and set off for the urban periphery, swelling the lumpen proletariat out of all proportion.
Thank you. Yeah, so like I was saying, this speaks more specifically to what Adama was saying, although Jerry, I have some quotes I think you're gonna love later on. Um, but yes, I think I wish I had highlighted the bottom part of this quote because that's really the main focus. Because Fanon was talking a lot about what it ends up looking like when we abandon our rural areas, when we focus exclusively on these capitals that are built on the European ideal of what a city should be. We're replicating these painful structures. I think something that we don't talk about when we're comparing, or there is the comparison of between Europe and Africa is one that's like, okay, Europe is the superior power, and like, or even if you're not coming from that point of view, just like looking at the material and like what was successful. Even Fanon in the book is saying like, yes, these are undeniable successes if this is the metric that we're going off of. But now we're in these cities where the oppression is just deep. It's deep and rooted. We have the bourgeoisie, which is the next focus of this, who are like supposed to be rallying the people, supposed to be, the leaders of like art and culture, but they're focused on replicating European structures. They're not focused on helping their people at all, really. They're leaping to Europe whenever there's a problem, whenever something they need to call on, you know, this dominant force. And all the towns and villages are deserted. Like you said, they're not considered. The resources are being pulled away, extracted away. Land is being grabbed up. The landowners, he had a lot to say about that as well. Landowners are focused on exploiting their own people for profit. So I thought that would be a lot to say about like just the focus or the lack of focus on the rural areas, rural communities, because we see that today in America, even, we see that across the world. And I see Dania has her hand up, so I'll give the floor to her.
I don't want to cut off your thought.
Oh no, you're good.
Oh no, excuse me. You just made me think of a conversation I was having with a young person who lives in an urban setting. And we're having this conversation about like how unaffordable this place is, as a person who is doing advocacy work. Because if you're doing advocacy work, there's those folks that live in and around DC that probably make the most money in advocacy. But if you're doing advocacy and you're living in a major urban city, you're probably struggling to make ends meet. And so I was saying, I think that, what some of what Walter Rodney and Frantz Fanon and others were inviting those of us who have gotten sent away from our villages to do is to consider like, you know, we're supposed to return. We're supposed to like be a part of the political education of our villages. And this person said to me, like, the way I interpret that is the uprising from the masses are supposed to come from inside the masses. In other words, like there shouldn't be people who go away and get educated and come back. Um, and and so for me, like I'm curious to hear what other people think about that, because for me, especially as a returning resident, I kind of think of like, you know, obviously my country can do more than well without me. But if there is a brain drain that only goes in one direction, then, what is the political education that is occurring amongst the peoples that aren't necessarily reading The Wretched of the Earth, or aren't reading how Europe underdeveloped Africa, just because I don't know. Those books aren't even available in rural libraries. And Adama spoke about, like, her library not having tons of copies of books like that. So I'm just curious, like, this really speaks to that conversation of like the pull into the urban settings and away from the rural. And I'm just curious what other folks think about, is the solution an organic uprising of the masses, or is the political education kind of an invitation for folks to leave the urban settings and re-enter the countryside?
Yeah, I have something for that. I think about that a lot. As somebody whose work is centered where I'm from, but I spent the past 10, 15 years traveling the world. And I feel like the views that I got traveling are the ones that I'm taking back home to implement. And when I think about urbanization, I think about the fact that the Greek philosophers that developed the idea of the city got it by traveling and learning from the Moors, who built big institutions of learning. So I think we're giving them too much credit by saying they're the ones that developed urbanization and large institutions of learning, because that's what they would do. They would leave their villages, they would go to these higher institutions of learning to learn about advances in agriculture, to take back to their villages that were experiencing drought, to be able to, keep their villages going. So I think we're, the originators of that kind of concept. It was just kind of, um, no, I can't think of the word, but it was turned into something completely different. You know what I mean? So I think about that a lot though, where it's like, you leave the place, and what you learn is what you want to implement in the place that made you who you are. But then it's kind of a fine line where you feel like the change should be coming from within. But if those people are never leaving and they're inundated in those colonial systems, they can't really kind of see outside of what they're in, especially as someone mentioned earlier, where all you're getting from every angle is capitalist, propaganda, and you're not, they're not able to see outside of that when the library doesn't have the books, and what you see on TV is just perpetuating the same story. So yeah, that's my thought on that.
Okay, so before hopping into that, I'm also gonna speak to Adama's comment in the chat. She said, when I look at this quote, I think of the overlay for African Americans who migrated to escape lynching and violence in parentheses, in addition to economic gain versus imperialism happening in the colonies where the migration is mostly due to economic repression. I think maybe I did that out of order because I do want to speak to what Yoshi was saying. But Adama, did you have anything else to say to that quote or to your comment?
No, I am agreeing with all. My thing is though, when I'm reading this, and because I have lived in other countries as well that were colonies, right? Versus, I want to just say the Black experience of being hostages that were human trafficked and, you know, um, a citizen of empire right on top of us, you know, we have the same experiences and some things. What do they say? It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, that kind of thing. So for me, I'm able to just look at where it's not repeating, but it's rhyming. And I just felt like there's a little bit of a distinction there for that. Thanks.
Mhm. No, that was I appreciate everybody's input. That's also kind of where my thoughts went, because I was also reading something recently from the BLA, but I honestly can't remember what piece of like literature it was. But the specific quote I'm thinking of was talking about like Marxism in the context, like Marxism on its own, like it has no utility unless you're like making it contextualizing it in your own national context. And I feel that Fanon was also kind of speaking to that as well, um, to the point of being a person leaving and coming back. Um, I think that there has to be a united front. Like the point in this quote where it's the unaided, the uneducated, and the untrained rule masses. So who is going to aid, educate, and train the rule masses? You know what I mean? And is that going to be in their own interests or not? I think Fanon also speaks to that aspect of it in saying that like the masses are fully capable of understanding the like multiplicities and the complexities of their experience. Like if you're putting it in plain language, people can understand and articulate their struggles just fine. I think when I think to just people in my community, um, we are aware of all the different layers that are like here, but it's like you don't have the words to articulate it until someone like helps you along the way. You know what I mean? Another thing that he was saying in terms of like the development of a nation outside of colonialism and the colonial context and trying to, create something new outside of the system is that there has to be a focus, like an equal focus on these rural areas as these urban areas. It can't be a situation where, you just have people floundering out in the outskirts of your country, of your nation, of your community without that education, without the health, without, all of those things that like there's a huge problem with resource sharing between like urban areas and rural areas across the world, like period. And when you see even like an example of like overcoming this, I think would be, well, China's a good example, but also just literacy in Cuba, for example. Like they went out into the rural areas to make that happen, to make like their literacy rate go up. And I feel like in talking about bridging this gap, I think it's just like it has to be a joint effort. There's no reality where it's not. And I actually had another point about that where it's like coming from like Eurocentric ideals where the focus is not on systems working together in harmony, but on a prioritized core. And I feel like that's not practical. It's not like realistic. It's not like helpful in that core. What the core that we're currently operating under and have been for a long time has been these systems, institutions, cities that are built on like Western ideals. So those were my thoughts on that. Oh, Raylan.
This is really interesting. I will often have this conversation in a familiar context, from people who have chosen to leave, the rural area of South Carolina where my family is from and has ventured out to different metropolitan areas. And the crux of that conversation always becomes you have to see oppression from all its many sides that it takes. So oppression in a rural area may not look like oppression in an inner city, but the same outcomes are the same outcomes. People are still impoverished in different ways. People are still hungry in different ways. People are still ill educated in different ways. But all of it is to end up with the same result. And all of it is the same oppression goal under capitalism. So I think this is a very interesting perspective, especially from Yoshi's point that it doesn't matter where you are, where you ebb and flow from rural area, peri-rural, peri-urban, urban. Oppression is oppression, no matter what color it comes in, no matter what system or function it takes. But it does require all of us from all of its many facets to come together to understand like we're all being punished or we're all being choked out by this system in all these different ways, and you have to see that from all its different angles to be able to cut the head off of the snake. I think it becomes more of a divisive screen when we're feeling like it's rural versus urban, or you have more resources than I do. We're all being oppressed by the same overarching system, and I think sometimes it takes people from different areas or folks that have transitioned in between those areas to kind of get that in a full picture.
I I wish I could raise my hand. Can I say something quickly? I just want to say I really agree with that. I think that's one of the most beneficial parts of a study like this, of a work like this, is so that you can look around and be like, this is what's at play in these different dynamics. And the awareness of that is an like it's the most important part to the shift, right? And so him talking about Europe uh disappearing itself, subsuming itself under the universal, as if it has the right to assume a universality. Like it makes it now you can see, now we use terms like whitewashing because he illustrates what it looks like to prescribe your specific myopic smallest continent on the globe experience and make that the normative standard of behavior in a colonial language, excuse me, right? So our ability to be looking around, designating how this could play out, how it might play out if we fight each other, how we absolutely had nothing in common aside from these colonial maps thrown together in these particular ways, is the precursor to, what he gets to later, which is we got to come up with something way new. It's got to be new. It can't even be you thought it was new, because most folks are recycling colonial foolishness around colonial maps, behind colonial trauma, as the psychiatrist. And so, like, those levels of consciousness, I think, is the whole key to unlock the thing. And so, yeah, I agree completely. And the rural urban conversation is the one we have to have. The one we're all having. We're all having multiple versions of those conversations. I think that's the most important part, too, in my opinion.
Sorry, Lena. I wanted to, I feel like you might have messed up by using this quote so early because everything that everyone's saying is so generative and I'm getting goosebumps. But another thing that I have been really radicalized by in the past 4 years in particular is my imagination has been really consumed by climate reparations, and just this conversation around these capitalist monopolies that have us thinking so much about, like, I mean, for me, like, it made me realize how ignorant I was about, like, oh, I'm putting my cans in the recycling bin, like I'm doing my part. Captain Planet would be proud. Like, no, actually, like, like your individual carbon footprint is only like one really, really small piece. But like, if we're not paying attention, like there's no boundaries. Like the climate crisis really underscores the fact that all of the geopolitical mapping processes that have captivated our imaginations to have us have like national biases, like even you'll see in the chats, like continentals versus United Statesian versus Caribbean blacks, and we'll be like, which one has the best mac and cheese, or what, you know what I mean, like those like little things and stuff. And it's like, actually, we're all the most exposed to carbon emissions and produce the fewest harms to the environment. Like, it's like every single peoples of color produce the least amount of harm to our climate, and all the degradation of our cultures, languages, religions, all of our like indigenous practices were in harmony and balance with the environment. So it's like so abundantly clear that even if we just put slavery to the side, like even if that's like, even if the word reparations doesn't even mean what we've thought of it to mean as a requirement of the transatlantic slave trade, the UN's Court of Justice this July, I don't know if folks know this, like this July they were like, y'all can get reparations, nation states can get reparations for climate degradation, like, and there's really like two people who would be holding the bag, right? It's all like the fossil fuel industry, right? Like all of the people who have given us fake science and fake data around what we could individually do to work our way out of this climate catastrophe. And so I think more now than ever, as I'm reading this book and thinking of myself as like a global citizen, like a global victim of a need for wealth redistribution around the climate crisis, it's so salient that we do have to be in constant dialogue with our people all around the world. Like it's really all of us versus the 1%. It's like the 99% of the world that is experiencing the harms of climate degradation, which is a complete direct byproduct of colonial capitalism. Like all 99% of us are owed reparations from the 1%. And there's actually a really good report that Oxfam put out 2 years ago about that, if folks are interested in looking at it. But that was one of the documents. It's a long document, but that was one of the documents when I was like really connecting the dots between being global citizens that should be demanding reparations. And now the UN's court is like, yeah, actually, this is a very compelling argument when, it's the 99% versus the 1%. So, yeah.
Just the extra 2 cents from a public health major. I As a child who had asthma, it's so interesting to see how people around the world contract asthma, like asthma that they are not born with. And that's a really good deep dive if you want to go into it, because petroleum uptake in skin is what causes it in Ghana. But if you're in an environmental racism donut in New York, you can end up with asthma. If you end up with a pig farm 2 miles down your road in North Carolina, you end up with asthma. If you are in Vietnam, the after effects of World War II, you end up with asthma. So that's a really good deep dive hole if you want to go Google later.
I'm sorry, bro. If I could, they just you said discussion. We discussing. um, sorry, like all the way back at the beginning, and then Dania kind of brought it back around for me. Thinking about kind of the flight to the city and being a global citizen. And I often would think, how have these cultures stayed so close to their agricultural roots and stuff like that? And then I came to realize it was only because capitalism let them, right? America and Europe wanted to be able to urbanize. So they said, hey, you all can stay in your countryside. Like you can be farmers, you could be agriculturalists because we need all this cotton, we need all this linen, we need all this rice, we need all this stuff that we're not willing to make. So these countries have been able, and I'm thinking specifically like Southeast Asia a lot. And so that's the only reason why. So to say, so on one hand, wow, beautiful, you all are able to stay close, but at the same time, and then I think something that I'm trying to see her name. Oh, Raylan said, where it's like we're all suffering from the same system where now they are living in their own country as the agricultural slaves to the world. They're not being allowed to industrialize and urbanize if they wanted to because they're being relegated to the work that capitalism is saying is good for their country because it's good for the capitalist world. So that was my last thought I wanted to just get out there. But everybody kept piling onto my thought and I was like, I have to, yeah, sorry. All right. Thank you. Thank you for this discussion point. Haven't even read the book. I'm here. I'm having
Wow. I feel like y'all are, I might tell you, you guys are jumping ahead of every like quote I have. I feel like we're really getting into it. So I didn't move the next one forward to talk about what Yoshi was just saying. Kind of not in opposition to, but on the side of what Yoshi was just saying, another thought that had come up for me, talking about this rural versus urban and thinking about like the purpose of that. So there is that one slice of like, yeah, you want us to produce these raw materials and produce this and that so that it's being, consumed, right? But then the other side of it is like, who benefits when all the people in the rural areas are leaving their land, and who's benefiting when because when you think about right oppression and all of these the stratification of society, and you're moving into this urban area, you don't have the same education as all these people who have grown up, come up in this area. And even speaking as someone who grew up in the suburbs which are supposed to be so like rich, privileged, all that was not my experience, and that's not the experience of a lot of people in America, where it's like the resources are not there. And you go to these urban areas, and what position of society do you end up occupying in that area? Like, so much of our, I think the way I think about it, or the way I've talked about it, especially and when I started working in like rich areas and all of that, I was like, they're literally using us as batteries. Like, I feel like a battery. Like, that's literally just what I feel like. Just, and then it's replicated in like every industry and every like scope. And we're not even talking about like the way that people and who was being trafficked as well, but people, not even talking about like human trafficking and all of that, but just in occupying a level of society where you're being underpaid, you're working these jobs that are like hell on your body, on your mind, on your soul. Your persona, like, you're not treated as a human in so many of this, like, dehumanization, like, point blank period. And you've left your community, you've left your village, you've left your safety net, if you will. And to what? Now your farm got bought up by this big company. And here we are. I had so many, it's so hard to keep track of like all the things that were said, because every time someone said something, I said, oh, I have something to say. Oh, I have something to say. Oh, I have something to say. And I feel like we had at least 5 people chime in. So I really can't remember everything that I was going to say. So if
You make some really good discussion questions. That's all it means.
I appreciate having the space with you all here tonight. So if it's all good with everybody, if, as Raylan says, all hearts and minds are clear from this slide, we can move on to the next one. Or I see some things in the chat. Oh yeah, like veggies and fruit being specialized crops. The study that came out that says in no place in America can a person earning minimum wage afford a 2-bedroom home based on the fair market value, urban or rural. Fair market rent. Yeah. How are we supposed to live? Like, truly. And then you get into debt, and that's his own thing. And honestly, not to be a ominous person, but I in the back of my mind, I fear like the criminalization of debt in this country, because then what? Like, then what? Especially with how we've treated like education is like, oh, this is the end all be all. You have to go get your education. You have to go to college. And now not only are you in debt, your parents also in debt half the time, that parent plus, you know what I mean? So there's a lot to unpack with these structures and what we're living under. And speaking on like frantz fanon being a psychologist and being able to like analyze the experiences of people. Oh, the point just whoop out of my head. Ooh, I don't know. I hope it comes back to me. So I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Honestly, I really do want to get it back. Hold on. If y'all give me 1 second, I'm gonna. Because it was a good point. That's okay. All right. So I decided to switch the slides around again, based off though what somebody said. So does anyone want to read this quote? Okay. If there's no takers, okay.
I'll read it since I started talking. Independence does not bring a change of direction. The traffic of commodities that goes unchanged. No industry is established in the country. We continue to ship raw materials. We continue to grow produce for Europe and passed the specialists of and passed for specialists of unfinished products. Yet the national bougie never stopped calling for the nationalization of the economy and the commercial sector. In its thinking, to nationalize does not mean placing the entire economy at the service of the nation or satisfying all its requirements. To nationalize does not mean organizing the state on the basis of a new program of social relations. For the bourgeoisie, nationalization signifies very precisely the transfer into indigenous hands of privileges inherited from the colonial period. 100.
Thank you. Real quick, because I did remember what I was going to say, and kind of it does tie into this quote. We're winning. So what I was going to say was speaking on Frantz Fanon and just his whole perspective as someone being as a psychologist and not being his vocation, right? And talking about what I was just saying with like, oh, how the system entraps us. Like, okay, you have to go to college, you have to do this. Now you're in debt for the rest of your life, like. Because I don't know. I know many of my friends' parents are in debt, like in college debt, and now they done took on their kids' debt and all of that as well. But there's also this like culture of superiority over this like whatever route you decided to take. Oh, it's seen as so much better to go to the city and go to college and get your degree and all of that. But to what end, really and truly? Like, especially when we're now in this stage of living where it's like, what value does your bachelor's degree have? Like, but how like it's not the same. Like the game changes. And when we're something huge and what he's talking about in this whole thing is in defining yourself in not only in opposition to, but in relation to this structure that's like European, the structure of a colonizer, because it's not just Europeans who are colonizers, but of a colonizer. You are really just trapping yourself. It's a trap. It's like there's no way around it. You're either honestly, Jerry, you said it perfectly earlier. Like you have to, it has to be newer than new, in order to get out of all of this. So yes, thank you, Yoshi, for reading the quote, and thank you guys for the grace and listening to me going back to my thought. But yes, this is definitely something that we covered in our last quote a little bit. I decided to highlight the continue twice because we're saying we continue to ship raw materials, we continue to grow produce. That continuity, we're doing the same thing we were doing when it was colonialism. And I mean, that's a whole conversation of neocolonialism, which is, well, the same thing effectively. You know, your products, your people are being used to bolster the rest of the world. And what does that look like? What does that like? And then you have a whole section, a whole caste in your society upholding this structure. Like, wow. And I really enjoy how he puts like his when he's writing, he puts like opposition pretty close together. He'll say like, here's the colonial reality, and that is in direct opposition to what it could be. So he's saying like, we're continuing to ship raw materials, we're continuing to grow produce, and pass for specialists of unfinished products, which I thought was a bar right there. I'm not gonna lie. But then what did he say? To nationalize does not mean, and this is the opposition, and it's thinking to nationalize does not mean placing the entire economy at the service of the nation or satisfying all its requirements. To nationalize does not mean organizing the state on the basis of a new program of social relations. So if we're trying to place the entire economy at the service of the nation, because what is like an economy? What is an education system? What is a government if it's not in service of its people? But when we look at the world, is the government or what? Oh, Jerry, what do you have to say?
Was it me? Yeah, I was not even to. I think a point of clarification. I think when he's speaking about this from, is it a Martinican perspective? Martinican. Don't judge me. I'm getting my life. I think he's speaking to what a lot of the first one, Martinican. Thank you. A lot of what the Native Americans experience here, which is they had that one joker that sold everything at the one dinner where they believed that X white man sitting across from the fire was telling the truth. Not that they would have honored the treaty anyway, but in these colonial contexts, this notion of these privileged elites whose whole identity and um, sustenance is dependent upon these extractive models. And what does that look like when that is not really in service, right? So the same is happening in these nation states representation. So like Louisiana does it to us, right? We're open for oil in the largest, most cancerous corridor in the nation, where now, you know, that the pushback against the what should be illegal manipulation of our waterways for extraction, for pollution, not only is the mechanism out of our hands, but the people, you know, but the people who should be looking out for our well-being are eating off of the rights to do the thing. And so I think, you know, that's part of a big part of what he's speaking to when he says, like, we can't just make everything in service to the nation, because whoever's sitting on top of that is going to be making the choice for all, whether it's in their best interest or not. And we see that replicated everywhere. And I think if I was going to reduce it to like 2 words, I think the neo-colonial conversation that he's trying to have here, yes, I see it. Number 2, producer of gold, exactly, exported into raw form. Yeah, I think they're trying to get a hold on that thing now. I think they're right. But yeah, cost and compromise. Cost and compromise. And then lastly, the cost, he's basically saying to participate willingly or unwillingly is a direct form of mental illness. The psychiatrist in him is actively diagnosing real trauma and specifically mental illness as a result of even participating, right? In whatever way you find yourself. Even the pushback, even the violence in rebellion is like trauma inducing and problematic. And the compromise of thinking that you can bargain your way into a better, more sustainable life with a mechanism that's kind of built around not acknowledging your full humanity or even your own ability to experience violence as it is committed against you, where it's only acknowledged if you commit the violent act. And we're seeing that right now play out on the streets. But yeah, not to take up too much time. Yeah, reframing it as an illness is the big important part, I think, to seeing our way.
No, 100% agree. That last chapter is some serious business. Like when he's really getting into all the cases he experienced, and I was really blown away, honestly, like genuinely, because you can see the mental pressures of colonialism not only on the colonized but on the colonizers as well, like because you're perpetuating deep evil and you're aware of it on one level or the other. And I think this chapter in talking about the bourgeoisie, Fanon doesn't even consider these people like real bourgeoisie. He's like, y'all are not even doing what you're supposed to do in your community. You're fake. And you're pandering and copying Europe without anything. He called them senile, actually. That was one of the words he used. He said, this is like, you're senile. This is the end. This is literally, you're starting at the end of the European cycle. And where can you go? Like, where can you go? The last quote, or the last little highlight from this quote that I had said was, for the bourgeoisie, nationalization signifies very precisely the transfer into indigenous hands of privileges inherited from the colonial period. And Jerry spoke a lot to that just now, but also just like, ooh, that envy, that jealousy, that trying to replicate those systems will destroy a country, will destroy people, will, like, you're undermining your own freedom, you're undermining your own community, you're undermining really everything, like everything that has been fought and bled for in just trying to replicate these systems. And I had some more quotes around that, but Does anyone have anything to say? No?
Well, I think for me, when I think about the um, there's like a group of people, and I think they exist in most of the countries, a group of people who like they measure their independence like completely in how close to whiteness their rights are. And I think it also kind of goes back to the first quote a little bit too. It's like when when you don't know who you are and the only thing you can imagine yourself to be is an approximation of an opposition to your colonizer. I mean, that is like you're like that's what Bob Marley was talking about in terms of emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Because if you can't get past that internalized inferiority complex, and you can't, and you can only replicate feeling free if you have power over the indigenous peoples, like if the indigenous peoples are only ever an afterthought when you're having a discussion around liberation. Like, I think that he's really lifting the veil on how like shallow that use of the word independence will ever truly be. And so I think there's I love so much about the him being a medical doctor, like making a diagnosis of like people in that, fake bourgeoisie, who oftentimes have like a close approximation of what the colonists' power was, but they actually like Killer Mike was like, they can't hunt, they can't fish, they can't grow their own food. So like what are they even talking about? Like what can those elites, what like value can they add to society that the masses would even want to emulate or replicate, right? So like to me, it's like I think that's why the young black men leading in Africa right now, like they're naming Thomas Sankara. Like I'm so like I love what Ibrahim
Mhm.
said recently about like they assassinated Thomas Sankara. Like I mean like Walter Rodney was assassinated. Like all of these like figures that were a part of like Pan-African liberation, like they were talking about it from all the needs of the indigenous peoples being met. And that was the thing that the colonizer couldn't tolerate. Like, but they had to like, they knew that if they killed that group of people, like the Black intellectuals, of that era, those were the people that were reminding those black folks that got educated like you're still equal. You have to always look at like your interdependence with the masses. You can't think about the world order being you above the masses. It has to be like arm in arm linked. And I really think that a lot of people miss the plot. And it's kind of like what Adama said about like these like ruling classes and the political elites, like they don't even want to see affordable housing. Like they're actively trying to undermine candidates that would even use that as a campaign, uh, policy agenda item. Like how, like in this economy, that's and Mara says that about everything now, but I'm like in this economy, like you're really trying to cut the knees out from under young leaders who are speaking about the basic needs of the masses being met. Like you'll only ever be a poor imitation of the colonizer, and you'll never be independent. And that's where the mental illness and the inferiority complex part come in for me.
That was an excellent addition. I really appreciate it. Um, wow. I don't even know where to go from there. Wow, I was listening so intently. I like all my thoughts left my head. I would say, can we move on to the next slide? I was like a mic drop. Whenever I see you, Danny, I'm gonna give you a mic so you can drop it. All right. So the next quote I will read. In an underdeveloped country, the imperative, this is talking about that same thing we were talking about. In an underdeveloped country, the imperative duty of an authentic national bourgeoisie is to betray the vocation to which it is destined, to learn from the people and make available to them the intellectual and technical capital it culled from its time in colonial universities. We will see, unfortunately, that the national bourgeoisie often turns away from this heroic and positive path, which is both productive and just, and unabashedly opts for the anti national and therefore abhorrent path of a conventional bourgeoisie, a bourgeois bourgeoisie that is dismally, inanely, and cynically bourgeois. And that speaks to many things that Damien said earlier. But we kind of talked through this one a little bit before. So I was telling y'all, we're just moving ahead of my slides. But truly, let's sit with this for a second. The imperative duty of an authentic national bourgeoisie is to portray the vocation to which it is destined. Like, that's huge right there. I'm not gonna lie. Like, your job as being in this social class is to portray what you have been told is your role in society. Like, wow, I feel like he was just so ahead of his time. I really don't even like, I feel like we really talked through this one. um oh, thank you for joining, Yoshi. um yeah, that was, I'm gonna honestly just even move past this because unless anyone has things to say, because I feel like we really talked through this a lot. I think this also speaks to your question earlier, Daniel, and like referencing your conversation with that young person about just like the role of like when you leave your community and coming back to it, like what is your job, what is your role, like, because then if not to pour back into your community, is that just to, will your role just be to assimilate? And I feel like assimilation, I don't even think that's like a real thing, honestly. I think like assimilation is mental torture, at least, you know, for me. I can't speak for anybody else, but I think like, because when you're talking about assimilating, you're talking about shedding parts of yourself in order to fit into whatever structure or like mold you're trying to fit, you know? So I do just think that it's like a kind of a betrayal of your identity when we're talking about assimilating. So to me personally, I do strongly believe that like the role of a person is with the people, truly, like, and when we start talking about like the whole thing with this oppression, and something that Fanon talks about is like how inhumane the humane Europeans are. Like, you're talking so much about the role of man in society, and you're coming up with all, oh, you know what, this is something that Jerry was talking about earlier, the like the um I don't want to say it's not, it wasn't generally social sciences, but I had a point about this being social sciences and the academia of like these structures being literally designed to oppress, kind of like, I don't know how else to say it. You're like, you're using your methodologies and you're using all of these scientific, like the scientific thought, this like academic thought, in order to like justify and not only justify but like provide evidence to why it's okay for you to be an oppressor, you know? um so in that last chapter he goes into that a lot with like psychology, because, and the Algerian case in particular, because that was a large part of the context he was operating from. But here we are just talking about how Algiers were being defined as like violent, thieves, and just a long list of like actually terrible, terrible. Like, he dedicated like 2 pages to like directly quoting this psychologist, and it was abhorrent, to borrow a word. It was literally terrible. To look back into the past and see all of these, like people who are upheld or were upheld as founders of just all these areas of study. And you know what? It's not even just social sciences, because you even look at like city planning, for example, and you look at where like Black people live in their communities in the cities and what like just the heat levels are. And I live in Baltimore, and I can look outside and say that, wow, there's not like street lights here the way that like in my area, the way like if I go to Hamden, which is a like historically white neighborhood, street lights on every street, you know. So it's like the structure of colonization and the oppression is very comprehensive, and I kind of meandered a little bit. So let's go to the next quote. And I have two, so if anyone would please read one of them for me, I would appreciate it so much. I'll give you a heart even. Going once, going twice.
I can read it. At Well, one quick thing is that it made what you just said about the the social scientists made me think about the foundation of our nutrition sciences, and just the anti-human research practices that they had for indigenous students in the residential facilities, and like pretty much starving them, or at the very least not intervening as they were starving, to get things like this is the minimum amount of calories that a human being can consume. And I think that directly connects to this quote. At the core of the national bourgeoisie of the colonial countries is a hedonistic mentality. A hedonistic mentality prevails because on a psychological level, it identifies with the Western bourgeoisie from which it has slurped every lesson. It mimics the Western bourgeoisie in its negative and decadent aspects without having accomplished the initial phases of exploration and invention that are the assets of this Western bourgeoisie, whatever the circumstances. In its early days, the national bourgeoisie of the colonial countries identifies with the last stages of the Western bourgeoisie. Don't believe it is taking shortcuts. In fact, it starts at the end. It is already senile, having experienced neither the exuberance nor the brazen determination of youth and adolescence. Now that's a word.
I had to include this one in here because of my feelings on hedonism and like living for pleasure. But wow, I'm gonna read the next quote and then we're gonna chat about it. I hope y'all have some things to say. Um, the bourgeoisie, which evolved in Europe, was able to elaborate an ideology while strengthening its own influence. This dynamic, educated and secular bourgeoisie fully succeeded in its undertaking of capital accumulation and endowed the nation with a minimum of prosperity. In the underdeveloped countries, we have seen that there was no genuine bourgeoisie, but rather an acquisitive, voracious, and ambitious petty caste, dominated by a small time racketeer mentality, content with the dividends paid out by the former colonial power. This short sighted bourgeoisie lacks vision and inventiveness. It has learned by heart what it has read in the manuals of the West and subtly transformed itself not into a replica of Europe, but rather its caricature. This little section of quotes, I think we really got into a lot in like when we were talking earlier, which is why I said, y'all, we were jumping ahead. But I'm like a little nervous. Yes, I think in talking about hedonism and the hedonism of the Western bourgeoisie and what like hedonism has a negative connotation for sure. But if we're looking at it on the surface, it's like the idea of living for pleasure, you know, or living in pursuit of pleasure in contrast to like pain. And it's so interesting that the hedonist mentality is not like you're not thinking about like your country as a whole. You're thinking about what feels good to you personally, which is I consider myself a hedonist, but I think of it in like a I kind of approached it on like a community area. So I like involving I like engaging with um like the dominant way of thinking about it. Um but we're just looking at this quote um and it's like when we're replicating things from the European perspective, when we're replicating the colonial structures, we're taking something that's already dead. We're taking something that's already dying, if not dead, you know. And what can you really like build from that? Like what can you create out of that? There's no spark. There's no you're not building your country. You're just using it as another battery. Like you're replicating that same structure of like the individual being a battery into a national context. Um, he said equivocative, voracious, and ambitious, petty case. It's like you're not here for the growth of your country. You're not even here for your own long term success, your long term goals, your long term just long term power, long term anything. You're just replicating the same structure. So I'm if there's no comments, we can move on. Honestly, I want to skip we have less than 10 minutes left. Oh my goodness. I want to skip maybe 3 slides. Hmm.
While you skip those slides, I just want to say one of the things that the second quote, well, the hedonism quote too, makes me think about like the way that self-care has started to mean like I mean, I feel like self-care, cancel culture kind of flow into each other, and they're kind of versions of um, rugged individualism and just I feel like COVID kind of exacerbated the ways in which people um, are using therapy language to not sit with the reality that building community is inconvenient and being in a village is really hard. The more and more you understand how systems work, you understand how people have complicated backstories and are also functioning within capitalist systems that are extractive and anti-human. Um, it makes it really hard to just like be in relationship with another human because we're all flawed humans. And I think one of the things that we're being called in to do for the decolonization of all of these systems is we have to figure out how to make an us care, a community care, like system that is not harming individuals, but is also recognizing like the metric, the measurement of success has to be inclusive of especially, you know, like it cannot exclude um people in your community and absolutely cannot exclude indigenous peoples. And I think that's going to be something that's a challenge in the world of technology and AI because folks are becoming more and more individualistic. And there's people who are now like being in relationships with AI and chat GPT and stuff like that. But I think that um, it's just another example of the further we get away from building solidarity and building community, the further we're functioning the way um, the fake bourgeoisie was functioning in the just post-colonial state.
No, heavy agree. Ooh, go ahead.
Can can I offer something quickly? I'm driving, but on on hedonism, not actually on hedonism, right? But on the usage of these colonial terms, you know, and how the minute you pin it down, now it means something else. But I think specifically in an American context, in a very, you know, we see this with the Trumpian political dynamic that basically says, well, if there are no rules and if it's going to be, you know, a felonious leadership from the top, then let me get my let me get my deal too, you know. And I think the reverse, I guess, for lack of a more clear term of hedonism, is this notion of, well, what does accountability look like? And I think he's also speaking to, once these colonial payout buyout structures collapse, there's a scarcity that breeds a very almost predatory level pursuit of self and self-interest. And if we assume that people are just going to do the right thing with our collective national money, then we would be wrong. And he's speaking at it like as a group of people seeking a freedom from colonialism. And he's like, if we don't fix these mechanisms, we'll never have it. And that's kind of, you know, definitely what we're seeing play out in American context, you know, especially as a Black woman in the South, especially with the whites, you know, the ones who used to carry around the constitutional, you know, the whole booklet and the pamphlet in their pocket. And now it's very much relative, at a point where it was, you know, it was Bible. It used to be law, but to some it was Bible, even when it excluded many people in so many ways, Black people, women, etc. And we were barely experiencing our rights. Now you see them throwing that away in the interest of trying to align themselves with who they perceive to be in power and in a position to help them politically.
You said it perfectly. You said it perfectly. Yeah, the American context is one in which, you know, America is in the position it holds globally. Um, and that we see it. Like we really do just see it. And how like citizens here, citizens, non-citizens, people who live here, interact and engage with each other. So we are at time. So I want to say thank you for having me, everybody. If I could leave you with one last quote from the Wretched of the Earth, because I think the way he opens the chapter on national culture is very, it resonates with me. So I'm gonna just read that and then hand it over to Dania. But okay, each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it, in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. Oh, I lost it. Sorry. And more than one peasant revolt had to be quelled, more than one generation demonstration to be repressed for us today to stand firm, certain of our victory. So, thank you guys for having me.
Lina! OMG. I am feeling very misty. I'm so proud. I knew that handing over the mic to you tonight was going to be so such a pleasure for me personally, just to bear witness to your brilliance and for others to join in. But as was already shared, you picked incredibly thought-provoking quotes. I feel like I'm so grateful to you for volunteering, and I'm so happy that we all got to bear witness to that. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for participating in the conversation. There will be a WTF next Wednesday evening. Yeah, you did that, Lena. There will be a WTF next Wednesday evening, but the next book club will be that following Wednesday evening. So stay tuned to the newsletter for the announcement of what the next book will be. And thank you all so much for a truly, truly, truly rich. It was the perfect quote that you closed us out with, Lena. So I'm grateful that all of you were along for this discussion of this book. And here's to many more book clubs and many other teammates and book club participants facilitating future sessions.